Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Dollar Dialogues. Today, we are going to talk about something that's very important, which is the role of South Asia in the global economy. Today, we have here Shazib Karim and our Arif Malik as our usual host, and we are also excited to invite our first guest speaker, Zibrail Zahir, to this show. Welcome, Zibrail.
Thank you for inviting me to the show. As I've been a former AISD student, and currently I'm studying in Swiss boarding school in St. Gallen, and it's called the Institute of Dem Rosenberg. And today I'll be honored to share my thoughts on the role of South Asia in the global economy.
Thank you, Zibrail. Zibrail is a very talented student who is currently studying in the Swiss boarding school, as he said. He is also an Oxford man, literally, because he is going to travel to Oxford this summer to learn more about economics and about finance. Now, moving on, we are going to talk about South Asia's role in the global economy and more specifically the economic role that South Asia is going to play. So, before we start about the basics or the meat of the story, we should also first define what South Asia is. It's common knowledge that South Asia or South Asian countries consist of countries in the SARC political group, which includes countries such as Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and this such countries. And it's worth to note that South Asia and this region has probably one of the most diverse cultures in the world. This region is very diverse, and it's also home to the world's most number of Muslims and world's most number of Hindus and most numbers of Sikhs. So it's a very diverse region. It's a very large region. And when people think of South Asia, people usually think of countries such as India, such as Bangladesh, and such as Pakistan. So in this podcast, we're going to primarily focus on these countries, and we don't the reason we're going to do that is to simplify our conversation and to make it easier for others to understand. So we're going to focus mostly on the role of South Asian countries or the South Asian giant countries, which have a large population, such as India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, and their role in the global economy. So let me start by talking about some basics. Now, everyone knows that South Asia plays a very large importance in the global economy in terms of IT sector, especially because of India. Most people know that many of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, many of the CEOs of Fortune 500 IT companies are Indians. So South Asia diaspora plays a major role in the economy, running the global IT economy. Now, Shazeb, would you like to talk about something about the role of South Asia in the global economy?
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with everything you said. I'd agree how you said that South Asia is a region of rich diversity with economies ranging from different diverse countries, like you said, that there are countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And I'd say that these countries that you mentioned, they all of them have shown robust growth trajectories in their economies. And also about the IT sectors that you mentioned, um, I'd say that there has been a lot of growth, like, for example, textiles and garments, IT and software services, and agriculture play crucial roles. Additionally, there's a burgeoning scene of startups and fintech innovations in urban centers.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with all of them. Now we have talked about we're going to talk about more about the role of South Asia in the global economy. The first thing that we talked about is the IT sector, which I believe is 100% what Shazab said. That's true. And now there are also other roles in terms of manufacturing that South Asia is going to play a role in the global economy, such as the garment sector. Now, Bangladesh, India, both of these countries are one of the largest garment exporters in the world, which just shows that the diverse potential that South Asian countries have. And also South Asia, also countries such as India have played a major role in the global pharmaceutical sector through their companies. And India, I think, it's also called the pharmacy of the world because of the number of generic drugs that they supply at an affordable scale to the global world, and also the number of vaccines they have produced in COVID-19. And this shows that the role of South Asia in the global economy is very diverse. It's not just in one sector, it's in different sectors such as IT, such as pharmaceutical, and even tourism. Like, if you think about countries now focusing on the South Asian countries with a smaller population, such as Maldives, they play a very important role in global tourism, because whenever people think of Maldives, they think of like nice beaches, good place to vacation. So this also shows that South Asia has an important role to play also in the field of tourism. Zirbal, are there any things you would like to comment on?
Yes, I would agree with all the things you mentioned, but I would say that the major power or strength that South Asia has to contribute to the global economy is just its sheer population numbers. So South Asia actually has a very a younger demographic. So there are a lot of working class population and also younger. It's also concentrated in the younger population. So there's a vast potential for growth in the upcoming years, and there's just an abundance of cheaper labor that are in demand in many countries around the world, like in Middle East. They need a lot of labor for infrastructure, and this is evident from the numbers that these South Asian countries are generating in terms of remittances. So they're generating billions. Like for example, India generated 83 billion in remittances in 2021 alone, and also Bangladesh, the a big contributor to the GDP of Bangladesh is also remittances. So 22 billion in 2021 alone, which contributed to around 60%, I believe, the total GDP. And because of this large number of workforces, we can also excel in sectors such as garments and textiles, which you mentioned before. And we have a large working population, and we're also inclusive towards women. So in factories, like in my factory, I'm pretty sure 70% of the workers are actually women who are making the stitching and garments. And
Excellent.
there's also agriculture. There's a focus on agriculture as we have fertile soils. So there are plenty of sectors that South Asia excels in, mainly in the primary and secondary sectors.
Excellent points brought up by Zibrail. Arif, would you like to comment on the things Zibrail has said, such as the young population of South Asia and their importance in the global economy and also in the South Asian countries' economy?
Yeah, Raf, I think Zibrail has truly brought a really good point here. If we look at the economy of South Asia, which comprises of 2 billion people, which is a quarter of the world's population, it's truly remarkable that most of the demographic that Zibrail has mentioned is younger people. So younger people is beneficial to the global economy because obviously they can put in more work and they can put in more hours. So it is quintessential for the global economy. And I also completely agree with Zibrail that the South Asian market is truly an untapped market, and many people overlook this fact that the South Asian market is tapped and all that. The South Asian market is liberal. As Zibrail mentioned, in his factory, there's also women who are included and are part of the workforce. So this truly shows that South Asian people are open-minded and historically speaking, like in my history class, for example, Shazib is also in my history class. He can also talk about this. In our history class, we're
Yeah.
talking about South Asia, and what we learned was that South Asia was in fact the richest region in the world. I believe in the 17 and 1800s, mostly because of mostly once again because of the demographic. The people are young, and also the South Asia has a lot to offer in terms of businesses. There's a lot of textile, cheap labor, and spices as well. So yeah, I really agree with Zibrail on the point that he has brought up.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah, Shazib,
um,
go on.
all right. So, and also to add on what Arif and Zibrail said on the young population and how they're so beneficial, I definitely agree, because the young population in South Asia is incredibly resourceful. Many are self-taught programmers, while others have formal education in STEM fields. Their ability to quickly grasp and utilize new technologies is accelerating innovation and driving tech startups to new heights.
Yes, excellent points brought up by Shazib, Zibrail, and Arif. And so far in this podcast, we have been extremely optimistic, and some people have said to me and commented that we should be a little more nuanced in our analysis by by focusing also on the negative points. In later in this part of the in this episode, we're going to also talk about some of the challenges that South Asia has to overcome in order to be a key player in the global economy. But anyway, so far the positive things that we have talked about are the IT sector, the garment sector, the large young population, the pharmaceutical sector, and also I think we also talked about tourism sector and about countries such as the Maldives, and not just Maldives, but even Nepal, India, Bangladesh. There is a large tourism base in these countries, and not in Bangladesh that much, but in India and Nepal surely a lot. People go to Nepal just to climb the Mount Everest. There's a lot of tourists going to Nepal. But I also think one of the most important roles South Asia would play later in the global economy is through energy production. Like India, I think it's one of the major players in the production of coal, and which is, even though the world is now moving on to renewable energy sources as is such as solar and wind energy, the production of coal in countries such as India, which I think is one of the largest in the world, shows that South Asia also plays a large role in the global energy sector also. And I think that's very much important. That's very much important. And now moving on to something that's something more related to food or spices, as Arif has commented. South Asia is also the world's among the world's largest producers of spices, tea, milk, and this are South Asian tea, such as the Sri Lankan Ceylon tea, is very popular in the world. And this also shows that South Asia has a very positive image in the global perspective about the food that South Asians produce, such as tea, milk, and spices, which just shows that South Asia has a lot of potential in this sector, such as agriculture and agro processing. What do you think about those, Zibrail, Shazib, or Ari?
I'd say that South Asia is really crucial in bringing in tea and spices, and it really contributes to the global economy. And I'd say, South Asia is often called the land of spices, and for good reason. Countries like India and Sri Lanka have been at the heart of the spice trade, influencing cuisine and culture around the world.
Yes, I agree with all of the things that you have said. And now let's focus on something factory related or manufacturing related. I think in countries such as India and Pakistan, even in Bangladesh, and even in smaller countries, smaller population sized countries such as Nepal, there's a lot of efforts being put into automotive manufacturing. And I think that South Asia would also play a global role in the automotive manufacturing industry in the world. And also, now speaking about something that's very, I think, important, is energy spectrum. Moving back to the energy sector, and if you look at the amount of, if you think about the part of the world that's heavily invested, or is heavily has played a major role, and that's the Middle East in terms of the energy sector. And I think South Asia in the future is also going to play a big role in the energy sector, because if you just think about the population size, South Asia, it has to produce a lot of energies for its own population, but I think it also has the potential to also export some of this energy to other parts of the world, such as Central Asia. And as I've said before, India, I think, is one of the largest producers of coals in the world, and so is and Pakistan, and countries such as Bangladesh. We are also heavily invested in producing natural gas, and which is also good, I think. And even though we don't have a large, I would say, energy abundance by God or gifted by God, we are also still trying to harness the power of nature to produce electricity. Personally, for example, when I went to Nepal, we visited some of the power plants in that country, and it's very interesting, and it's very interesting to see how they're producing electricity to hydropower, which is very important to make sure that South Asian countries are producing their energy sustainably. And so I think South Asia is also going to play a major role in the export of different energy resources such as coal, because India is one of the world's largest producers of coal. Even Bangladesh and Pakistan, I think, are investing in these sectors. And now moving on into the digital and economy and startups, everyone knows that the way the world is moving forward, the digital or the virtual world is going to be as important as the real world. And I think South Asia in general, and India in particular, has invested a lot of in the digital economy and startups. Speaking personally, in Bangladesh, for example, we have a lot of online e-commerce businesses growing up, such as I would say Bikro.com and Daras, where people shop online. And even India has a lot of big digital startups such as Flipkart, Paytm, and Zomato. And one of the main things that South Asia is going to play a key part in the global economy, I would say, is the IT sector, as we have said before. But also, I think that the digital payment system that we have in South Asia, such as India's Paytm, even in Bangladesh, we have our own digital payment system, is going to also play a key role in the global economy. And so what do you think about those, like the digital economy and the startups that South Asian companies are having? Will their impact be in South Asia, or are they going to also move into other parts of the world?
I'd say that South Asia's digital economy is growing at an exponential rate, and the region has seen a massive increase in internet penetration over the last decade. And that's thanks to more affordable smartphones and cheaper data plans. And I'd say that the digital revolution has laid the groundwork for a thriving ecosystem of startups, from fintech and e-commerce to health tech and ed tech. Young entrepreneurs are leveraging technology to solve regional challenges and meet diverse consumer needs.
I
Yes,
completely agree. Araf, also, like, South Asia plays a significant and increasingly prominent role in the global startup ecosystem, and I think that is driven by several factors, including the large, young, and tech-savvy population of South Asian countries. But also, we have to take into consideration of cities which acts as innovation hubs. In the US, for example, there's just Silicon Valley, but in South Asia, we have cities like Bangalore or even Lahore, which are often considered Silicon Valley of India and Pakistan. And these cities are where entrepreneurs gather to host and even create a plethora of tech startups and global IT companies. And I think South Asia, other than that, the region has also seen a surge in venture capitalism. I would say primarily because, as Sajib mentioned, the South Asia is getting more modernized. Internet packets are more available, and therefore I think that it's easier and it's very easier for startups to occur. And yeah, Zibrail.
Yeah, I would totally agree. For me, I would think that the technology and the startups are still quite an untapped market in South Asia in particular, because the potential is still quite limitless. As the South Asian countries are growing in terms of wealth, we'll see that these startups will start booming and becoming very important. For example, in Bangladesh, we have Bkash, which is now a $1 billion company. So we'll see more tech startups growing in the future, in the near future.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with what Arif and Zibrail have said. And to add on to what they have commented, I'd say that countries like India lead the charge with major tech cities such as Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Mumbai. And these cities are not just startup hubs, but they also attract significant venture capital investment. And I'd also say that Bangladesh and Pakistan are also catching up with their own startup scenes. Dhaka and Lahore have become centers for innovation, drawing attention from international investors as well.
yes, those are the points that I absolutely agree with. Now, coming back into something that's not that popular, or that that people think about, and that's the labor sector, or the foreign labor that South Asia exports. Now, Zipra has talked about the foreign labor that South Asia exports, but I would also say that South Asia plays a global role in the exporting of labor, and that's very advantageous for countries such as South Asia because of the huge amount of foreign remittance that countries in South Asia are able to earn. And if you look at the any economic student or any person who has just started the economic course, they would learn that the factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And I would like to thank Mr. Spivey, my econ teacher, for teaching me those things. And so if you look at the four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, you would know that labor is very important because you need labor to produce more. And South Asia, through exporting our labor to different countries, such as the in Middle Eastern countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Dubai. Not Dubai is not a country, but still a city. But in countries in Middle East such as UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, and then Yemen, Oman. Not Yemen that much, but Oman, these countries. When South Asian people go to these countries in the Middle East, they're able to use their own knowledge or use their own expertise in the different fields that they're used to, and are able to sell their labor for portions of money. And we're able to have a hegemon on this unskilled or skilled labor market in the Middle East. And this also shows that the role South Asian economies play in maintaining a global order. Because if the Middle Eastern countries, they didn't have a labor, they wouldn't have been able to develop so much or build new infrastructure so much. And it shows that South Asian countries, through exporting their labor, we also are able to leave a footprint in other countries. At the same time, we're able to earn a lot of money in our own country. So that's also a very positive thing, I would say. And if you anyone who has been to the Middle East, especially the Middle Eastern countries that I've talked about, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, these countries, you'll see a lot of South Asian labor. And I think that because we have a presence of our own labor in those countries, we're able to make sure that first of all, we're able to make sure that people in a country are able to work and earn money, and at the same time, we're having South Asian countries have been able to grow their foreign reserve because of this labor. So, what do you think? Is this a good thing that our labor is going to the Middle East? Personally, I think it's two-sided, but I think it's also good because we're able to earn our foreign reserve. At the same time, we're able to make sure that we're living our footprint, our economic footprint in those countries, in the Middle Eastern countries, because as I've said before, one of the factors of production is labor, and by placing our labor in the Middle East, we're able to live a economic footprint in those countries.
Araf, I think that is a very good point that you have brought up. I think we also talked about this in our last episode as well. Remittance is once again a contentious issue because you have said it's a double-sided argument, but I would be more leaning towards the positive sides, because the truth is most South Asian countries, even though we are developing, we are not developed yet, and many people, they see opportunities in the Middle East. For example, some of the I believe that laborers say that like some of the laborers that go to Middle East, like I've met some in the Dubai airport. They say that they personally choose to go to the Middle East and choose to work in the hot sun, because most of them work in construction companies, and they would rather do that instead of working in Bangladesh, because the truth is the money that they receive in such Middle Eastern countries are more favorable than the money that they receive in Bangladesh, and therefore the money also has more value. So when they send it back home, the value increases. And remittance is good because also, yeah, it's a significant part of our economy. But in the future, I would hope that most Bangladeshis would rather stay in Bangladesh and work and contribute to our economy rather than like going to Middle East, let's say, and work.
Yeah, those are the points I extremely agree with Arif. Zibrail, would you like to share your opinions on this discussion?
Yes, I would like to share my opinions. Remittances are a big potential for South Asian countries. They contribute vastly to the economy and the GDP overall. I would say that yes, these workers are going to these countries because they're promised like better pay, better conditions. But I would say, if possible, I think that if the labor could be more, perhaps higher skilled or specializing in certain things, then maybe they could get even higher pay. Because the real reason these countries are getting labor from South Asia is for the cheap and abundance of the labor, and sometimes they're getting treated poorly, like as mentioned, in the hot sun, and they're not giving proper housing. But I would say this is a great opportunity for South Asian countries to expand to other countries and build connections as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with all the points that you guys brought up about the economic empowerment. Another point that I would want to bring up is about the skills and career development, because I'd say that another positive is the opportunity for skills development. Working in the Middle East can provide South Asian workers with exposure to international standards, new technologies, and advanced working environments. And I'd say that many return home with enhanced skills and experiences that improve their employability or empower them to start their own businesses. And I think that this fosters entrepreneurship and further economic development.
I agree, Shazib. And to add on to that, as Zibrail and Shazib were saying, the Middle Eastern countries, I also would like to talk about Qatar, for example. Qatar, for example, employs the kafala system. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of it. It's basically the system in which the migrant workers are completely reliant on their employers, and it's mostly practiced to the Persian Gulf region. So I would say most of the Bangladeshi workers are vulnerable to the kafala system, which some reporters say that it's modern day slavery basically, and therefore I would completely agree with Zibrail on the fact that Bangladeshi laborers, even though they go to such Middle Eastern countries for better payment, they should work on their skill development, because once again the truth is the Middle Eastern countries, take Bangladeshi laborers and South Asian laborers primarily because of the cheap prices.
Yeah, those are extremely good points that you have brought up. Now, I would like to go back to another point that we had discussed before, but we didn't get to talk about that much, is the pharmaceutical industry and the role that South Asia plays in the global pharmaceutical industry. As I've said before, India is known as the pharmacy of the world because of the huge amount of generic drugs that the country provides. And I think India right now, I'm looking at some statistics in my table. As in the statistics I see right now, that 50% of global demand for various vaccines comes from India. Then 40% of generic demand of in the US for pharmaceuticals comes from India, and 25% of all medicine in the UK comes from India. And not just focusing on India, but looking at South Asia in general, this shows that we are be able to play a global hegemon role in the pharmaceutical industry, and we're able to make sure that we're living an economic footprint there. And I think the pharmaceutical industry is also an industry that other countries in South Asia, such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, should explore. But right now, speaking of the role that South Asia is playing, I think that's very optimistic to look at, because when people think of South Asia, they don't think of pharmaceuticals. But I think people should revisit their opinions about South Asia and just look at the huge amount of roles South Asia is being able to play in the global economy by participating in the pharmaceutical sector. Are there any opinions you like to share on this thing that I've just talked about, Zibrail, Shazib, or Arif?
I would say in terms of pharmaceuticals in South Asia, it's mainly concentrated in India, as they're actually the third largest producer of pharmaceuticals by volume, exporting drugs worth 20 billion in 2020. But yeah, as you mentioned, it's also important for other South Asian countries to tap into this market, as it's also a big opportunity for them, and it's also a challenge they must overcome for the future, as currently South Asia South Asian countries struggle with their healthcare systems.
Yes, I would say, yeah, obviously South Asia has to develop its healthcare system, but I would say that the exporting of pharmaceuticals from South Asia is a good sign that the countries on South Asia are able to grow. And obviously has some challenges for countries in South Asia. But Shazib, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I'm like the last point that Zibrail brought up. I'd like to add on to it because I agree with him, and I'd say that the pharmaceutical sector in South Asia, particularly in India, is among the world's largest and most dynamic. India is known as the pharmacy of the world, providing generic medications to almost every country. And I'd say it's not just about generics. The region is also advancing in biotechnology and is starting to innovate with drug discovery and development. And this is branching into more complex products, like, for example, biosimilars and the specialty of pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, Shazib, I would also agree with you here. And one factor that we haven't really mentioned here is that even though like South Asia, South Asian countries, for example, India produce about 20% of the world's generic drugs in terms of volume, most people also often overlook the fact that South Asia is not just for manufacturing, but there's also a great research and development program that works around here. So I feel like the R&D department is often overlooked. Most people often assume that such Western powers, for example, the United States or the UK, are generally in charge of such like companies based off of their usually have more resources. But I also feel like South Asia, the R&D department is really increasing at an exponential rate. For example, like a few years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe that the Indian companies like the Serum Institute of India played a vital role and developed actually their own vaccine. So this shows that South Asia is also not only for manufacturing, but they're also researching, developing in their own ways.
Yeah, those are extremely good points that Arif and Shazib and Zibra have brought up. Now let's move back to the energy sector, because I think we've talked about a little bit about coal, but now I would like to talk about the renewable energy sector in the world. And right now, I have a report on my desk, and that's about Adani's. Adani, some people may know he's an Indian billionaire, and Adani's green Khadwa power plant, which is in Gujarat, which is a state in India, and it's 5 times the size of Paris, and it's a renewable power plant that's used to produce electricity, such as solar, such as wind power, using solar and wind power, and it's able to produce, and it will be able to produce around, I think, 30 megawatts of clean electricity, which is I think a lot. I'm not sure about that. I'm not familiar with the units used in the production of electricity, but I think that's a lot. And I think South Asia is also going to play a key role in the development of the global renewable energy sector, because the power plant that I've talked about is the world's largest power plant, I think. And it's also 5 times the size of Paris. That's a big power plant. And just to think about it, a power plant that's that big, and at the same time, it's a renewable power plant, which shows that South Asia, I think, is also going to play a key role in the global renewable energy sector. So, are there any opinions you would like to share about this topic?
Yeah, Raf, I think you have really brought a good point here. Like South Asian countries, like even though we're developing countries, people often have the perception that developing countries are like have to rely on other developed countries for resources and such. But truly said, like South Asia's energy sector is diverse and dynamic, and it is really characterized by the abundance of resources that we have here in India. For example, you mentioned about the Adani factory. There's also other giant energy factories such as the Tata Power and the Reliance. And even in Bangladesh, I believe there's a even though Bangladesh is not really naturally blessed in terms of energy, there's also an untapped market for natural gas, and I believe that many companies in Bangladesh are trying to utilize that trying to utilize that in order to export the natural gas. So I believe that South Asia in the future will definitely play a vital role, because the truth is we have a lot of natural resources, but we don't have enough funds, and therefore once the countries are developing and have enough GDP, they can utilize that fund to invest in the energy sector as well.
Excellent points brought up by Arif. Shajab, would you like to say anything about this topic?
Yeah, I would also agree with the points that Arif has brought up. I'd say, for example, if we look at India, India has set an ambitious target to achieve 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. And as of now, they've already reached about 160 gigawatts, which includes solar, wind, and other renewable sources. And and I'd say that it's not just India. Even Bangladesh has plans to generate 40% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2041, and they've been rapidly expanding their solar energy projects, particularly solar home systems with over 6 million units installed nationwide.
Thank you, Shazab. Zibrail, would you like to share anything about this topic?
Yes, I would like to share. The renewable energy sector is very important for South Asian countries, as currently it's mainly concentrated in like coal and natural gas. But the shift is important because, like, for example, in textiles and garments sector, a lot of buyers like from the US, they nowadays they demand a certain like carbon footprint, like a cleaner carbon footprint and a cleaner renewable energies in factories, or else they won't give the orders, they won't allow orders from the countries. So it's very important. And right now there's also a lot of development in South Asian countries for renewable energy. For example, in Bangladesh, they're opening a nuclear power plant. I think it's Rampur nuclear power plant. And it's going to be very important for these South Asian countries to shift towards more renewable sources of energy to cater to the demands of the global economy.
Thank you. Excellent points that have been brought up. Now, let's recap the things that we have said so far in the episode for our audience. The roles that South Asia is going to play in the global economy so far that we have discussed is the textile and the apparel industry that we have talked about in the beginning of this episode, and the role that South Asia also currently plays right now by exporting, if not by exporting some of the world's, by having countries that export some of the world's most textile products in the world to international brands such as H&M and Zara and Uniqlo. And South Asian countries are currently also playing a big role in the exporting of textile industries, and they're playing a by textile is a very important industry in the world, and by having a key role that South Asian countries play by exporting to these countries and to exporting to these companies, to global companies, we're able to make sure we're leaving an economic footprint in this industry. We have also talked about pharmaceuticals, and we have also talked about, I say, automotive manufacturing. But I don't think we have talked about automotive manufacturing that much, so I think we should focus a little bit on it. And now, talking about automotive manufacturing, the company that comes to my mind is Bajaj. If you have been to any South Asian countries, or if you have been to countries in Africa, in East Africa, such as, I would say, Tanzania, and I think and some countries in the northern portion of Africa, such as Sudan, Egypt, and even in the Middle East, such as what's that, Iraq. And these countries use the Bajaj or tuk-tuk, or the rickshaw or CNG, whatever we call it, the three-wheeler. And I'd say the South Asia manufacturing sector has also is playing a global role by exporting their products to these countries, because we're able to make sure, like, people use Toyota, people are also using South Asian products such as Bajaj, which ensures that we're able to leave a footprint in this industry. And also, I think South Asian companies such as Tata Motors also export to different countries in the world, and which shows that South Asian countries are also being able to leave a footprint in the global automotive manufacturing sector. Now, Zibrail, are there any opinions you would like to share on this sector, the manufacturing sector, automotive manufacturing sector?
Sure. The automotive manufacturing sector has also a big potential in South Asia, with India being one of the largest automotive markets in the world and a major hub for automotive manufacturing, distributing both like domestic and international automotive products such as like Honda. Pakistan is also growing in the automotive industry. It's also primarily focusing on assembling vehicles, and Bangladesh is also automotive industry is also growing steadily.
Yeah, so I you guys have brought up some really important points, and I'd say we should look at some statistics, because, for example, companies like Tata Motors have reported a 25% increase in production efficiency due to automation. Similarly, other sectors are also seeing tangible benefits from embracing these technologies. Because I'd also say that in the electronics sector, firms like Foxconn, which assembles products for major global brands, have significantly invested in automated systems in their Indian facilities. And I'd say that this move is part of a larger trend where South Asia is becoming a hub for high tech manufacturing.
Yeah, Shazib, I would also completely, and Zibrail also, I would agree with you. Like South Asia, like we're truly the subcontinent itself is really being a global and major player in the automotive industry. Arav said, Arav brought up some brands in India, for example, Bajaj. I would say one brand that comes to my mind straight away is Tata Motors. It's one of the India's largest and most well-known car manufacturers. And Tata Motors has a significant presence not only in India, where it has a huge market share, but also in the UK, South Africa, and other parts of Asia. Not only that, it also owns prestigious brands such as Jaguar and Land Rover, which I believe it acquired in around 2008. So this shows that South Asia is not only for cheap manufacturing, but we are also slowly developing into more advanced manufacturing, such as cars. And even in Iran, I believe the largest car manufacturer in Iran, which is called ICCO. It produces large number of vehicles, and even there's a manufacturing plants in most South Asian countries. In Bangladesh, I believe I went to a manufacturing plant where they produce motorbikes, which is also one of the untapped markets, because in South Asia, we are, not only do we use cars, I feel like most people utilize the motorbikes. So I think if South Asia could potentially cater this motorbikes vehicle to other countries, it would also be a huge profit for us.
Excellent points brought up by Arif, Shazib, and Zibral. Now let's move on to something that's heavy, or specifically talking about heavy machinery and equipment. When we think about like normal people don't think about that much about heavy machinery and equipment that's required for construction, mining, and agriculture. But I think because it's very important that we construct more, we mine more, and we grow more crops. Heavy machinery and equipment is more important to cater to the growing world population. Now, talking about the heavy machinery and equipment, I think South Asian companies such as Larsen and Tobro, not so, I don't think they're South Asian companies, but I think the factories that they have in South Asia, the companies that I've mentioned, Larsen and Tobro, they're able to. Oh no, they are actually South Asian companies. Larsen and Tobro, specifically talking about Larsen and Tobro, this company is actually one of the world's, I would say, biggest, if not the biggest, one of the world's major heavy industry and machinery producing companies in the world. And I think that by producing their equipment in countries such as India, they're able to make sure that South Asia is also playing a global role in the in the heavy manufacturing equipment industry. Because as I've said before, this company Larsen and Tobro, by producing machinery for construction and mining and agriculture and all those sorts of things, we're able to make sure, they're able to make sure, and South Asia is able to make sure that we're also playing a global key role in the heavy machinery equipment sector. So that's a very big economic role that South Asia countries are playing. Are there any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Raf, I think it's a really good point that you have brought up regarding South Asia and the manufacturing, specifically heavy manufacturing. And I believe that heavy manufacturing is slowly starting to take place in South Asia. And no, and as you have said, a couple of brands that and companies that are really starting to take place over South Asia. And I would also bring up another point pertaining heavy machinery, and that is like many countries, specifically the countries, rich countries where companies are based out of. For example, Caterpillar in the USA, even Komatsu in Japan, even Volvo, which is from Sweden. They have many manufacturing plants, not only in South Asia, but also in some parts of Southeast Asia, for example, in Vietnam. So I think that countries are starting to see that South Asia is not just a place where you can get cheap labor, but it's also like starting to appreciate the fact that South Asia, the people are slowly becoming more and more skilled, which is why which is precisely why the companies are being attracted to South Asia more. Because once again, not only because we have cheap labor, but also because the laborers are getting skilled day by day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another point I would like to talk about is that um, the construction sector in South Asia is not just about urban expansion. I'd say that it's deeply tied into economic policies, international trade agreements, and foreign direct investment. And I'd say that these factors shape the demand and supply dynamics in the heavy machinery market.
Excellent points brought up. Zibrail, would you like to share something about this industry that we have talked about, which is the global, which is the heavy machinery and equipment industry?
Yes, the heavy machinery and equipment industry in South Asian economy is also expanding. As mentioned in the construction industry, it's needed, it's getting demanded as there's a lot more infrastructure being developed in these South Asian countries as they're growing in wealth. Also for improving the technologies of like agricultural sector for more efficiency, and the labor is getting more skilled. That's why heavy machinery is implemented to speed up productivity. And yeah, and also in the manufacturing industry, also like the textiles and garments, like specific, perhaps like laser, like specific designs on the clothings that getting trending and gaining popularity. So there are specialized machineries for that. And there's also mining, which also requires specific heavy machinery. So it's very important in South Asia.
Those are excellent points brought up by Zibrail, Shazib, and Arif. Now let's moving on to something that's very, I would say, personal for South Asian families, which is jewelry and handicrafts. Personally speaking, every South Asian family is heavily involved in the purchase of jewelry for a design or for, I would say, just to wear it. And jewelry such as made of ornaments just made of gold, diamond, and gemstone are very popular in South Asian countries, but I would say they also play a global role in the a very important role in global economy, because South Asian countries such as Sri Lanka are renowned for manufacturing gemstone, mining, and for their exports. And even South Asian countries such as India have also gained recognition for their diamond industry, which is, I would say, one of the largest in the world. And I read it somewhere that India produces a majority of the world's diamonds in Surat, Gujarat, which shows that South Asia also plays a key role in the global jewelry handicraft industry through countries such as Sri Lanka and India by when they produce their jewelry, such as I've talked about gemstone, and also through the diamonds in India, which shows that South Asia plays also a global role in the economy, a global economic role in the jewelry and handicraft industries. Are there any comments on this?
Yeah, Araf, I think it's a really good point that you have brought up. And to be frank with you, this point is are often overlooked by even South Asian people to some extent. The truth is, jewelry in South Asia is embedded in our culture. Most, as you have mentioned, I think 99% of all households in South Asia at least have some piece of jewelry. And I think I think jewelry is not just something that is symbolic, but also I think most South Asian families recognize, and I think it's probably through culture and generations, that gold is a commodity that usually is pretty stable, is stagnant. It doesn't lose its value that often, and the values even if it doesn't increase necessarily, it doesn't keep decreasing. That's why gold is preferably a safer alternative than investing for some South Asian families. And that is why I feel like gold and jewelry and other ornaments are particularly favorable in South Asia. And there's also like really amazing jewelry brands, for example Tanish, which me and you saw in Singapore, for example. Like, it's really interesting that kind of like South Asian jewelry brands are starting to pop up in Singapore and other countries, which really shows that it's an untapped market and potentially South Asia could dominate this.
Yeah, and I'd agree with the points you brought up. And I'd say that the jewelry industry in India alone is expected to grow at a compound annual growth of approximately 7% over the next 5 years. So the country exported around 35 billion worth of gems and jewelry in the last year. And according to the Gems and Jewelry Export Product Promotion Council, India India has more plans to export these gems and diamonds to other countries worldwide, which would also help grow the economy of in the India itself, and would also grow the economy of the South Asian countries as well. Because I'd say that it's not just about golds and diamonds. There's also a growing market for colored gemstones, with Jaipur being a global hub processing around 80% of the world's supply of colored stones.
Excellent points brought up. Zibrail, would you like to share something on this topic?
Yes, I would say that the jewelry industry holds an immense cultural significance in South Asia. There are several countries over here, such as India, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, who are known for their gemstone mining and cutting industries. And actually, South Asia has a rich tradition of jewelry craftsmanship, and the jewelry industry holds its significance in households throughout. Like Arib mentioned, in households nowadays, you won't find anyone without a piece of jewelry. So, and also, South Asia is home to significant gemstone deposits, including rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds.
Thank you for all the thoughts and for all the comments that Zibra, our guest speaker, has shared on this topic. Now, to summarize the good things or the things that South Asia is good at in the global economy. And to summarize, the key important role that South Asia currently plays and will continue to play in the global economy in different sectors, such as the sectors we've talked about, such as the IT sector, the garment sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the tourism sector, the digital economy sector, the heavy machinery and equipment sector, and finally the jewelry sector. These are all the sectors South Asia is going to play a key economic role currently in the future, and also is currently also playing a key economic role right now. Now, before we end this podcast, I would also like to talk about some of the negative things that currently exist in South Asia, or I would say the drawbacks that South Asia has to overcome to become a key economic player in the world. And what are some drawbacks that you think of? The first drawback I think of is the criminalization of politics in some South Asian countries, and specifically India. India is a fabulous country. India is also a very diverse country, and I've been to India a lot of. I've been to India 2 times, and I really like the country. The people are very friendly and they're really nice. But I would say that India, the thing that the South Asian countries such as India has to work on is the criminalization of fixing the criminalization of their politics. And for example, right now on my desk, I have a report about Indian politicians such called Atik Ahmed. He was an Indian MP and MLA, but at the same time, he was a big time gangster, and he was a notorious gangster and politician. He was also involved in the murder of some people, and I think he was the MP for Lok Sabha, which is the Indian Parliament, the central Parliament, for from Fulpur in Uttar Pradesh, and he was also the member of the state assembly in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, and from Allahabad West. And so I would say that he's one example, but there's several examples of the criminalization of politics in countries such as India, and I think that's one thing that South Asia has to work on to fix our political system to make sure that they don't hinder our economic growth or the role that our countries are going to play in the future. Are there any thoughts or comments on this?
Yeah, Araf, that's a really good point that you mentioned. I'd say that another drawback or a challenge would be that the one of the primary challenges would be economic diversification, because many South Asian economies are heavily dependent on a few sectors such as textiles, agriculture, or specific manufacturing industries like pharmaceuticals and automotive. And I'd say that this lack of diversification makes the region vulnerable to global market fluctuations and trade disruptions. and and expanding into high-tech industries and services can provide more stability, and it could spur sustainable growth as well.
Yeah, Shazib, I would completely agree with you here. Like many South Asian nations, including Bangladesh itself, I believe is probably around 80% centered around garments, which is probably is our greatest, which is our greatest asset and our greatest liability both at the same time. Because if Bangladesh is dependent on garments only, other sectors cannot rise up, and therefore the entire country depends on one sector only. But as for Araf's question, I would say not only that, but I would say also like South Asia, one of the most critical challenges that it faces currently is probably the income inequality and the inequality between the upper class, the rich class, and the poorer class. In India, for example, like I once saw a very graphic image where Mumbai, for example, there's a river. On one side, there's the high-end luxury buildings, and on the other side, there's a slum called Dharavi, which is probably one of the biggest slums in the world. And it shows the disparity in the incomes. Like even the South Asian countries are becoming really rich. The most of the industries are truth be told, most of the industries are in fact controlled by a few handful rich companies and families. So this shows that there's a greater disparity. And other than that, I would also say like South Asia, like there is bureaucratic inefficiencies, and in some nations there are also some corruption. But South Asia is slowly overcoming that, so I wouldn't be too particularly fearing of that in the future.
So those are excellent points that I've brought up. So the things that we have talked about, the drawbacks that South Asian countries have to overcome is their politics, to the fixing the criminalization of their politics, and also the corruption, the income equality, and also Shazib has brought up the South Asian countries such as Bangladesh and other South Asian countries also. We need to diversify our economy, and we can't just be focusing on one sector. Are there any things you would like to also add, Zibrail?
Yes, I would like to briefly go over the major challenges and drawbacks. As mentioned, okay, to start off with the corruption, South Asian countries, as seen in their corruption indexes, rank high globally. So corruption is a deep-rooted problem in for the growth potential for these economies, as it holds back the economy from rising to greater feats. And I think this also plays a role in the income inequality and poverty, as the rich people are basically able to buy out the politicians and evade criminal offenses, for example. And then there are also other problems such as education and skills. So these South Asian countries have a large labor, an abundance of labor. And I mentioned before, it would be very important for South Asian countries to improve the skill levels of these workers, improve the training, and that would contribute immensely. Also, the development of infrastructure is also vital for these countries, as they're as it's important to also develop the infrastructure and make these countries more suitable. For example, like tourism is also a major contributor for these for the GDPs for some of these South Asian countries. So improving infrastructure would be vital for also improving the tourism. And also environmental sustainability. Pollution is also a big problem in South Asian countries. So that's why we need to reduce our global carbon dioxide emissions and also move towards more sustainable options. And healthcare is also a big problem. For example, pandemic preparedness, COVID-19 spread paid a huge toll on the deaths of many South Asian. Uh, the countries face many deaths, so it's important to also improve the healthcare sector.
Excellent points that have been brought up. So, Zibrail, I think you've talked about the healthcare sector, the infrastructure sector, and I totally agree. But I would like to also focus. I think that the infrastructure sector in South Asia needs to develop a lot, especially the roads in the country, because if we have good roads in South Asia and if we have good roads connecting our countries, such as connecting our countries from one country to another, then we're able to make sure that our economy grows quicker, because we're able to do more work. And also the healthcare sector, I would say, is very important for South Asian countries, because if we don't have good healthcare, if we don't have productive, good, healthy workers, then that's going to be a big problem for our country. And the final point I would like to talk about the challenges South Asian countries need to overcome, and it's the I would say the struggle or the to keep friendliness between themselves. For example, South Asian countries such as Pakistan and India are currently not in a good that they have never been in good relations. I think it's imperative that South Asian countries such as India, Pakistan improve their relations for their own economic sake, so that they're able to develop quicker and at a rapid pace. And so I think that's also very important. So what do you think about that? Don't you think it's extremely important and imperative that countries such as India and Pakistan improve their improve their political relationships, so that they're able to increase their economy at a quicker or a faster pace?
Yeah, Raf, I think it's a really good point that you have brought up. In fact, I was being reminiscent of the time we had this discussion in history class. In fact, like we are talking about the British colonization in India, and
We also, I think it's also important that we also thank Mr. Spivey, because he taught us all those things in history class. I think Mr. Banks taught me, but it was Mr. Spivey who taught you. Know.
yeah, I completely like shout out to Mr. Spivey. Like, I completely agree with the fact. Like, Mr. Spivey once asked us, what was it really like? What factor was more quintessential? The fact that British had the fact that British had guns and stuff, or the fact that the Indian subcontinent itself was always fighting with each other. And the truth is, most of the people in our class, in fact, said that the Indian people quarreling among themselves was the greater factor for the British colonization in India. Because the truth be told, the British had way lesser number of people to even like colonize India. But the truth is, the Indian when I say Indian people, I mean the subcontinental people were hands on, like fighting with each other. So I think it's a great fact that you have mentioned that India and Pakistan, I would say more specifically, need to alleviate their tensions, particularly on nuclear warfare. I would say one prime example that we should look at is Bangladesh. Like, even though Bangladesh was technically part of Pakistan and we separated, Bangladesh still today maintains, I would say, a favorable and somewhat neutral relationship with Pakistan. And this shows that even though we were enemies at some point, their countries should look past that and start to make their situation, particularly their trading situations, better. Because, like, if India and Pakistan were to trade again, and if they were to settle their differences for once and all, I think it would be a huge GDP boost for both countries, and GDP per capita boost would also be seen.
Excellent points that
Yes.
have been brought up. Zibrail, would you like to share something?
Yes, as I was about to say, alleviating geopolitical tensions a big, would be crucial for South Asian countries, as it would alleviate a lot of trade barriers, as the intra-regional trade in South Asia remains very low, only accounting for 5% of their total trade. So alleviating these tensions would allow the economies to benefit from one another for their expertise in certain sectors, so they could potentially trade and boost each other's economy. And as Arif mentioned, it was only because they were focused on their differences that the UK was able to like divide and conquer, basically take over India. Because if the South Asian countries united together, then they would be much stronger against potential threats. And yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say to bring up another point would be that if Pakistan and India improve their relationship, it would help with international relations and image as well. Because I'd say that improved relations between Pakistan and India could enhance their international image, presenting them as mature nations capable of resolving disputes peacefully. And this could lead to greater influence in international affairs, including roles in global decision-making processes.
Excellent points that have been brought up throughout the episode. Now, I think that it's time to wrap up the episode, and to summarize all the things that we have discussed in this episode. So we talked about the economic role that South Asian countries are going to play at the global scale in different sectors, such as the IT sector, the garment sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the tourism sector, the digital economy, and also the heavy machinery and jewelry sector. And we also have talked about some of the challenges that South Asian countries have to overcome to make sure that they're able to keep also a global economy. They're able to improve their role in the global economy. And some of the challenges we have talked about is politics, corruption, infrastructure development, diversification of the economy, income equality, and healthcare. So I would say that, so throughout the episode we have talked about some very important and good points about the sectors that South Asian countries are playing a key economic role in a global scale, and that will hopefully they will keep continue to play key economic roles in this global at a global scale in these sectors. And also I hope that we were able to talk about some very important challenges South Asian countries have to overcome in order to make sure that they're able to improve their economic role in the global sector from the position that they're currently in right now. And I would also like to thank Zibrail Zahir for coming into this episode. Zibrail, as coming into this episode as a guest speaker and for sharing his opinions. Zibrail, I believe that you really enjoyed our time together throughout the episode. Am I right?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this episode. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak in this podcast and contribute my ideas. And yes, I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you, Zibrail. Thank you, Zibrail, for coming. So I hope that the audience were able to learn some key important sectors that South Asia is key, that South Asian countries are playing a key role in at a global scale, and will hopefully continue to do so. And thank you again for the audience for tuning in, and we will see the audience next week for our third episode of this season. And that episode is going to be also a very interesting episode. And thank you for tuning in today, and we hope to see you during our next episode.
You